Good morning, and thank you for joining us here for this special edition of 11 Alive Morning News as we honor the life of former President Jimmy Carter. I'm Aisha Howard.
And I'm Jeff Hollinger, and this is going to be quite a day. It's a day that begins in Washington, D.C. as we take a live view right now outside the U.S. Capitol as the casket is brought down to the hearse and will make its way to the U.S. National Cathedral this morning, Aisha.
Service members from all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces aligning the steps there. The honor guard here with a very distinguished role here as we see this happening down the steps of the United States Capitol, being lined by the men and women who have served our country and continue to serve. And what is a very special moment as the Carter family, dignitaries, loved ones, people who worked for the Carter Center, past and present, are here in D.C. marking this moment in time.
We really have seen a lot of crowds, a very diverse group of people, whether racially or gender or age. There has been a great reaction to the death of President Carter and what he accomplished in this country, not only politically, but certainly in the years after the White House. But you really got a sense of that. I think there was a bit of a curiosity about what would that look like, given it's very cold in D.C. We're talking about January and not easy to get out, certainly in inclement weather, and there's snow on the ground and all, but the crowds have been very large and very passionate in their love for President Carter.
And talking about what the crowds look like and who is among them, as we look at the schedule of events today, I highlighted several times in which the Carter family personally invited members of the military and their family to participate in special moments that they otherwise may not have been a part of. So even the presence of equality and inclusivity living on through the Carter family, and it's what President Carter was all about, Jeff, and I think that really speaks to the crowds that we're seeing. Despite when we started this morning, our Cheryl Preheim there in D.C. reported it was 4 degrees with a feels like temperature of far less as we saw the wind gusts through multiple shots from the nation's capital. So a man worth this honor and sacrifice.
We've talked about this over the course of the last week, but what goes on here in Georgia as it relates to President Carter's funeral and what goes on in Washington, D.C. has a very different look about it and a different feel. The federal government's involvement here is much more structured, minute by minute by minute, and certainly by all of, you see the ceremony and the pomp and circumstance. Here in Georgia, it has a little bit of a different feel, and certainly President Carter's involvement in preparation for his own funeral is the stuff of legend, where he had been tinkering with it for many years at various times, and certainly his fingerprints are all over this funeral service as well, particularly here in Georgia.
Yeah, and as we see the casket being loaded now into the vehicle to begin the motorcade there to the Washington National Cathedral, the motorcade will arrive there for an arrival ceremony that is set to take place at 9:30. And so with the flags flying in the wind there, several people, including dignitaries and several members of the clergy there, marking this moment as we begin a long mourning to the journey back home to Plains.
I guess as I look at these live pictures right now, I'm thinking about an interview that I saw with President Carter from 1985, where he was being interviewed by Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes. And this was at a time when the Carters were still formulating essentially what they were going to do post the White House. They had been out about 4 years. And Jimmy Carter had taken Mike Wallace to the Carter family cemetery, the plot where his mother, Miss Lillian, was buried, and she had died within the course of the last year or so. And he was very reflective, very, very misty-eyed about missing his mother and about how he liked to begin days in the mornings with her in Plains before the sun came up, and they would watch the sun rise and they would talk about sports or they would talk about politics. And he says, his words, she was always exciting company and he missed her so. And I was just sort of thinking about that this morning as he is taken back to Plains, about the meaning of his family, the meaning of his roots, the meaning of the soil in Plains, where he will now rest along with his beloved wife, Rosalind.